How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another edition of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today on the pod, we're going to be talking with Dave Roshak. He is the CEO, Chief Executive Officer at DMR Capital that focuses on DeFi security, early stage venture fund that he helps run. So he's got a lot of good experience in the leadership sector, in the professionalism world. We talk a lot about family. We talk a lot about triathlon. We talk a lot about profession. So really good conversation. Hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you so much for being here. And also thank you to Hannah Roshak, who's a past guest, who made the introduction as this is her dad. Make sure to go check out Hannah's stuff at Roshak Media to stay in touch with the cool stuff that she is working on in the world of photography and videography as well. If you made it to this point in the podcast, though, just want to say thank you so much for starting it. Really appreciate you being here. Check out the show notes in the description to see all of Dave's stuff. And then if you want to support the podcast, you can check out those links there as well. If you are listening on YouTube podcast platforms such as Spotify or Apple Podcasts, if you could review, like, comment, subscribe, all the things, turn on the notification bells, that helps to continue to grow this pod. Really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much for listening to me spiel. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to Dave Roshak. You're up in Portland right now. You spend time between Las Vegas and Portland. I'm assuming mostly for work, but it sounds also for training as well.
It's more training, a little less work. Can kind of work from anywhere these days.
Yeah.
But I've been in Vegas for about 5 years in Summerlin and really like it. But the summers are pretty tough. So I have a little place up here in Portland, and it's fantastic. The summers are just incredible. I'm about 3 blocks from the Willamette River, so every morning I get to grab my goggles and head down to the river. Oh
man, that's beautiful. What's the water temp like there?
It's getting cooler. You know, you start to feel more cool spots, but it's probably high 60s. And there's certain parts in the Willamette you want to stay away from, but I'm on a clean part of the river, so so far so good.
Yeah, that's a blessing. Are you from the Pacific Northwest originally?
No, I have 2 kids that went to college up here. So instead of paying the dorm fees, I bought a little bungalow house, between the 2 colleges, and I've kept it for about 10 years. I just like coming up here.
Okay, nice. Where did you grow up?
I grew up mostly in Omaha, Nebraska. Kind of a stone's throw from Warren Buffett's house. So he had a kind of a big impact on my career and my life, and just overall, philosophy. I resonate pretty well with the way he lives his life.
Yeah, no kidding. So was the impact like direct, relational? Did you get to meet him because he was so close?
I have met him a few times, more career-wise. I was an executive at Level 3 Communications, and he was a big investor in our company for a while. So got to meet him, more through that. And, coincident story, my first office in Level 3 was actually in Omaha, Nebraska, and we shared the same floor as Berkshire Hathaway. So occasionally, Warren and I's restroom visits would correlate. So I'd bump into him in the restroom too frequently.
Yeah.
Too frequent. Not a good time to talk stock tips, by the way.
Yeah. That's really funny. Well, you learn someone's, restroom habits. You can learn a lot about a person, honestly.
Yeah, office environments, you learn a lot about patterns, don't you?
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, that's awesome. So Nebraska, what was it like growing up there in the Midwest? Was a lot of kids in the family? What kind of kid were you?
Yeah, growing up in the Midwest, you know what they say about the Midwest? It's a great place to be from. Not necessarily, where I want to, spend a ton of time. The winters can be kind of tough, but yeah, it was a really good upbringing. I have an older sister and a younger brother, so 3 of us in the family. And my folks, my dad was in the Air Force, so he was a 747 captain for his career, and so that parked us in Omaha, Nebraska, and about 20 years in the military and 20 years flying commercially.
Yeah. How did that affect you growing up? Did you have to move a lot in the beginning, 20 years?
In the beginning, we kind of did. I was born in Georgia and, spent some time in Alabama. Probably the only impact, I think he did a couple tours in Vietnam. So my first 4 or 5 years of life, he was off doing his thing. So didn't see him. But yeah, I'd say after that, the plane that he flew was pretty much parked in Omaha, Nebraska. So we got lucky. We didn't have to, at Offutt there, we didn't have to travel around every 2 years. He stayed pretty close to the doomsday plane that he flew.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Did you ever want to be a pilot because of the trajectory that he chose?
It's intriguing, and one of my kind of weird hobbies is airplane crash investigation. So I do have an
Mm,
interest in aviation,
yeah.
but no burning desire to learn to fly. I think I just watched the structure of my dad growing up and just how
Hmm.
regimented he is with checklists and consistency and not missing a step in anything that he does. My brain isn't wired that way, so I would shortcut checklists and
Mm,
do things that probably good pilots shouldn't do. So yeah, I'm not sure
yeah.
that's my temperament. But
Yeah, for sure.
I'd say the other thing, just watching growing up, career choices are interesting. That's a tough career, especially back in that day. You're gone 50, 60% of the time. So in terms of, the impact of raising a family, that career choice, especially international, pilots, I mean, you're gone a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, gone a lot and away from family and weird hours usually too.
Yeah, middle of the night, he flew mostly UPS freight, to
Okay.
US to Asia back and forth in the middle of the night and did that for 20 years. And you're just gone a lot. And it puts, a little stress on the family. And, my mom had to step up and wear a lot of hats. And,
Yeah.
it's funny when I just kind of watching, I have a little more perspective now that I've been a dad.
Hmm.
It's when you travel a lot, um, the family gets into their system and their flow, and then kind of when you get back, you're in the middle of it, and you don't really know what the rules of engagement are. So he was always kind of a fish out of water, and I can empathize with that.
Yeah. How do you feel mostly as a fish out of water these days?
Oh, I think the water's feeling pretty good. So I'm a little less fish out of water these days. But, certainly earlier in my career, I think it's always tough to balance all the important things in your life, in terms of career, you know, family,
Mm,
friendships and community and wellness and all the things that you want to, balance your life. It's pretty easy to get over rotated on one thing. So I've been a victim of that in the past,
sure.
just particularly on the career aspect. I'd say the
Yeah.
first 20 years of my career, I was probably 94% of my life energy and effort went into that. So maybe a
Mm,
little over rotated on that.
yeah. Why do you think that was? Like, was there something you were trying to build? Did you have just like a really intense dream of a specific life you wanted to live, someone you wanted to impress yourself? Where did that come from, you think?
Yeah, I think it probably came from my upbringing. I've been working probably since I was 10 years old. I had a paper route,
Oh, cool.
in the spirit of Warren Buffett, who started, delivering newspapers as well. I delivered 287 newspapers in Omaha, Nebraska every morning for the better part of 4 years. And, I've just always had a pretty strong work ethic. But I'd
Mm,
say, a lot of it just comes down to, I kind of knew early on, um, my primary goal and objective was just about independence. I wanted to be, personally independent. I just kind of knew, back then, even as a teenager, when I was, you know, 40, 50, 60 years old, I'm not sure I wanted to have a boss for my entire
mm,
life. So financial independence was always kind of an important goal for me.
yeah. Hmm. That's interesting you said that because growing up for me didn't have a lot at all. He went back to school and I think when he was 30. And then he went to go be a nurse, like I said. Started working. We got a little bit more money then in terms of like just comparing and contrasting like the level of stringency, if that's a word that my parents had to, apply on. Oh, for this Christmas, you're getting towels. Like that was for some Christmases. And then as we got a little bit older, like I saw a little bit of just the possibility if you did go apply yourself in a different direction. But, you know, for me, growing up, what I really focused on going into like my high school and then college years when I started to, I guess, find a desire for a greater ambition was not even the money. I just wanted to like build something big, and I don't know where that came from. And I'm still trying to like figure that totally out. But as I've gotten older now, I've kind of swung the other direction. It's like I like doing those things, but I very much value my time more than I do like the cash aspect. So it's just like this swing back and forth. I'm wondering for you, because in the beginning years, you're very gung ho. You want to get it. You're working. That's 95% of your existence and purpose. What happened, and how did your perspective change as you started to get older to want to focus on something different?
Yeah, it is. It is an evolving story. Early everything's kind of where you came from. Like we were kind of a paycheck to paycheck family. 20 years in the military. It's you run out of money before you run out of month. That's kind of how I grew up as well. So I think in terms of evolving, it probably started off just financial independence being very important. And then, I think later in life, I'm 57 years old now. It's more about impact. What are the things I can do, to have impact with my family, with my friends, with my network, my work network now. So it's shifted pretty dramatically away from accumulating stuff and, financial resources to kind of, giving back to a community.
What do you find that your greatest skills are that maybe you weren't necessarily aware of as you started your professional journey, and then now they're more apparent and you lean into those and you find that those are the highest chance of give you the highest probability of giving back?
Yeah, I've always been, even though I'm a CPA by trade, an accountant, I tend to be pretty good at networking, and I'm pretty social actually as accountants go. So I think reaching out to communities through all the different chapters in life, that's kind of been important to me. It's actually a lesson I learned, in corporate America. I think you could probably say I'm a little bit of an introvert, but corporate America kind of forces you, over time to be a lot more extroverted. So, be comfortable at all the dinner parties and cocktail parties and social functions, and really just standing up in front of a couple thousand people and giving presentations. I think corporate America kind of made me a lot more comfortable, in front of small groups, big groups, different social settings. So that was a pretty good foundation that I probably, needed some development in. My comfort zone would be more, go back to my hotel room and read a book than, talk to all the salespeople down at the bar. But they kind of don't want you hanging out in your hotel room. It's better to go interact. So yeah, I'd say that's helped me, later in my career. I've made kind of a big career shift 7 or 8 years ago, away from kind of large corporate America and doing my own thing. And really you don't have the structure that corporate America provides, for you. Here's your day with 15 increments of meetings. It's kind of up to you to define your own path.
Make it happen.
And make it happen. So it's been interesting. Booking my own travel, for example, that's been a challenge.
Yeah. Do you like it more now with the flexibility, the fluidity of how your life looks?
I do. There are days, just, I guess, kind of show the transition. I was 49 when I kind of transitioned away from corporate America. I think I had, that was a tough decision for me. You're kind of the prime of your career at that point, but, I think I'd accomplished a lot of things that I wanted to accomplish. And I had a mentor back then that, just kind of observed, maybe you're a little over rotated on, corporate things and corporate travel. So, I took the plunge and kind of left that world and at age 49, which is pretty young, and really just started doing my own thing, which has largely been around early stage tech investing, with a focus in the cybersecurity world, which is a space that I know. So yeah, it's been a really good shift. I've gone from, 6 days a week of work and a lot of travel and to a schedule that I get to define, and then I get to pick, how much time and energy I want to spend.
Yeah. So with the cybersecurity stuff that you were involved in, just was reading through your LinkedIn a bit, and obviously there's a lot of experience there with working with teams and being a leader in that respect. I'm curious to know, as you kind of jumped off when you were 49 to be doing what you're doing now, that was DMR Capital when you started?
Yeah, that's basically the technology fund that I started about 8 years ago.
Yeah. So when you jumped off and you started doing this and you're working with, like you said, early stage entrepreneurs, really, probably I would assume still mostly engineers. So there's definitely that overlap. But what are some of the things that you just did not take into account that were a lot different in the way that you operated and related to the parties that you have to invest in?
Yeah, I'd say, some of the things that the biggest learning when you're an operating executive, it's a very hands-on job. You have a team, you have kind of aligned goals and objectives, and everybody kind of largely knows what the strategy is, and you're kind of rowing in the same direction. When I went off on my own, it's a lot more solo, so you get to define what your goals and objectives are. So, I had to decide, how much do I want to grow that thing? Do I want to, I had the opportunity to accept, a lot of, different investors that wanted to put money in, alongside, did I want to be responsible for other people's capital? So you've got, you have to go through that stuff, and, it all has an impact on how much time you spend, on it. So, the minute you start taking other people's money, you're a fiduciary and you're responsible for that. So it adds a lot of, real life, scenario to it. But, I'd say the other large thing is, one of the things I do is I, invest in early stage, ventures and some middle stage ventures as well. So companies that, are fairly large, and I'll take a minority investment in those companies and take a board role, for example. And it's been interesting. I've always reported to boards, probably the last 20 years of my career. And so I'm used to being the operating executive presenting to boards. And it's been a real, good experience for me to actually sit on the other side of the table and try to, have some positive, benefit for those operating executives. And it's a tough balance for me because I tend to be pretty hands-on. So I like to roll up my sleeves and here are the things we need to do. Let's go do it. And as a board member, it's more advice, counsel. You can, point a couple directions, but it's not your job to go execute the direction. It's, it's basically just, mentoring people, based on your experience.
So there's obviously a lot of joys and stresses that you can experience, I think, on either side of the equation there. But for you, like, you were talking about being an operating executive, you take the wisdom into consideration, you make a roadmap, and then you try to execute that. But from where you sit now, like you said, it's more advisory role, encouragement. For me, like, I'm a pretty controlling person. So that's like the thing I'm trying to always tamper and pull back and, to struggle sometimes to want to control things that obviously I have no control over. So for you, is it difficult to like pull that back, and like, how do you continue to motivate? And I mean, at what point, like, what is your relationship with control, I guess is what I'm asking.
That's a great question, Seth. I mean, I had the same the same DNA. I want to get in there and let's get this done. Let's do the checklist and let's start solutioning the problem here. And it was my first probably board experience where I had a good board chairman that I knew and trusted, and he helped me through that transition. He'd pull me aside after meetings and he's like, okay, good input during the meeting, and you're kind of overstepping. It's not your job to roll up your sleeves and get the job done. So you're really kind of an influencer mode. So it took some time, and it can be frustrating for people like us that are very hands-on. Consistency, I think, really helps, and then also focusing on the important things that need to get done, and letting the small things go away. You might have a couple of small points that you could add to a meeting, but if it's not really super relevant, it's probably best to hold them to yourselves. And so I had a boss once that I worked with for a long time, knew and trusted. He was the founder of Level 3 Communications and MFS Communications, so a big telecom executive. His name was Jim Crow, and he pulled me into his office one day and he said, Dave, he was an engineer and I wasn't. So he was like, Dave, you're just not very smart. So you better get used to figuring out the most important variable in the equation and focus on
my
that
goodness.
variable. So, and it was good advice, actually. It's like,
Yeah. It
sometimes
stung, I'm sure.
it definitely stings, but it's like, sometimes it's not your job to solve the problem. It's to identify in a complicated formula what you believe to be the most important variable and help people focus on improving that.
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that, because some of the best advice I've ever gotten led me to a similar conclusion about myself, and just the way that I think I can add, like you said, the most important variable that I think I can manipulate or like effectually change is just this idea of being the executor. But more than that, it was, from my younger years in college when I started my own thing, I had these very grandiose visions about, the kind of company I would build and how I would be at the top. And then I started to realize, and it hasn't been an easy thing to accept, but that I stand more to affect change, I think, from a position of like a number two or someone who's underneath, because I can cast a vision and I think that's fine. But what I really enjoy the most, I think, is, okay, this is the vision, but like, how are we going to make that happen? My love language is acts of service. So like committing to that and being able to step back and want to be able to step out of the limelight and not desire that one first position has definitely changed the way that I can be more effectual to people. And that doesn't mean I'm always going to be number two, but the idea about that is you can help people a lot more often in the shadows than like being out in front and like, look what I've done.
Yeah. It's good reflection, as you grow your organization, the power of teams and understanding where you get your energy and, where you fit. I've had, similar career, revelations. I had the chance to be CEO of a couple of companies that I work for. And I did a lot of reflecting on that. And my skill set, to your point, is probably, more financially, oriented than, I think CEO, that role would be kind of tough for me because it's very people oriented role. It requires a high EQ score and a lot of empathy and I'll be candid. There's a lot of Mondays, people come in and, talk about their problems and, I'm sometimes can be a little terse and, you think you've got problems,
Yeah.
Let me tell you about problems.
Have you seen this list?
Have you seen my list of things? So yeah, I think kind of knowing, yourself and where you get energy is that's pretty important. And it's funny, I worked with 50, 60 where I've invested early stage founder driven technology companies, mostly in cybersecurity. And I don't think a lot of people go through that reflection. They have that view of, they want to build the next unicorn and, they want to be the CEO, irrespective of the fact that every day they go to work, it's the biggest company they've ever worked for, and they don't really know, which direction to row. And sometimes, you'll even have founders that say that they're not the right CEO for the company at a certain stage, but they really struggle with giving up, the reins and the control and bringing in, experienced leaders who have, run organizations much bigger. So I see that quite a bit as, people not coming to that, that understanding or kidding themselves that they say they're ready to make that change, but then they don't.
Yeah. So I've never had an opportunity to ask this question of anyone who works in your specific field. So for many years, I really wanted to get into tech, and there was never the right opportunity. I felt like if I had the right idea or the right person and team, tell me what to do. I really struggled with this. I wanted specifically a man, just given my background. I wanted some kind of a man to tell me an idea and just here's what you're going to do. Go do it. And I struggled with that for so long. I was always seeking after that. And in tech specifically, it never panned out, long story short, at least not to this point. And I moved away from it, but I really fell in love with the idea. I'm sure you're familiar with Reid Hoffman and
of course.
Into how I built this podcast. And, entrepreneurs are rock stars now, Gary Vaynerchuk, whatever. There was this time when I was growing up where those were the rock stars I wanted to be, okay? And everyone has this idea or metaphor that's similar to the one Reid Hoffman talks about, where you jump off a cliff and you're trying to build an airplane on the way down with parts that you're not sure are going to work. So, which is a very good analogy. But there's this culture that I really fell in love with, that I have since fallen out of love with, which is throw everything at the problem, throw in tons of money, grow this thing as fast as a weed, and then when the first sign of a storm comes, hope it doesn't blow over. And if you look at it, most unicorns, they are the 0.001%. I mean, even Y Combinator, which ones are going to be the success, Anyway, so I've kind of fallen out of love with that. But What is your perspective on that? Because now I'm more of the mindset of like, I'm going to grow this oak tree. It is going to grow very small and intentional and specific, and hopefully can weather the storm when it comes. But what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that, tech, first of all, it's a big space in my view. It's a large industry, and it's everything from kind of the tip of the spear venture stuff that you're talking about in, early stage, platforms to, large established companies that just happen to be in the business of technology. So it's a pretty big, industry. I guess I found tech, my background was public accounting. I worked for, all the big public accounting firms, Price Waterhouse, and I got exposure to a lot of industries. And one of my first tech clients, you're going to laugh at this tech client, but it was AOL. That was high tech. You could actually hear the dial-up modem.
The first movers, though.
Yeah, first movers, and I got the benefit of seeing all the different industries. I had another client that was in the meat packing business, and I decided pretty early I didn't really get a lot of energy from the meat packing business. So finding the industry I think is important. Something that kind of fits your personality. I think it's not for everybody, and within the tech market though, it's a pretty wide swath of things that you can get involved in. I actually ran into a challenge. I had probably, of my 30 plus year professional career, I probably had 28 years of that kind of focused in technology in the sector. And I ran into a little bit of a different problem. It just seemed all the areas of growth were really covered up. There'd been decades of investment. There was established winners that, they had all the employees and CFOs they needed. So if you think about, what you can do with data in technology, you can transport it, you can store it, you can process it. There's been decades of so much investment in all those areas, and it's tough to find things that kind of are disruptive in those established markets. And I kind of fell into that as well, kind of a long time in a telecommunications platform. Level 3 was one of the largest, broadband providers, back in the day. And so one of the things I learned was it was capital intensive. It drove tech investing, but it was really more of an infrastructure play. And so it was tough to kind of differentiate away from that. So it required me to kind of step back when I left the telecommunications space and try to find areas in technology that were less structured and invested in. So that's actually where I found cybersecurity about 15 years ago. It was a big growing problem. It was very fragmented. Typical Fortune 500 company has 200 different tools that they're trying to cobble together. It's just complex, and there's no known solution. Even today, there's really no Google of security. There isn't a name that pops to mind, when you want to secure your environment. It's very fragmented. So with that complexity, brings opportunities for people like us.
So do you think it's better to try to grow something as fast as you can and then exit as soon as possible? Or is it more of and I'm not saying one way is right or the other. I think it all depends on a lot more experience, and I have none in this area. So I'm curious to know what your specific thought is.
Well, it's funny that some of that goes in phases. I would say yes, that the venture-backed early stage, if you're starting something, you've identified a need in the market. You understand who your buyer universe is. There's a known gap in the market, and you've been able to develop, a solution that hits that gap. It is expensive, and you do need to hit the market quickly, to get to get relevant. So, and that's always kind of tough with my background, especially being from Omaha. I'm pretty conservative. I don't like losing money. I like
accountant.
Accountant. I like companies that make money. So plowing, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars into development stage and pre-revenue stage can be stressful for people like me. But I understand it's a big market opportunity. You got to swing the bat pretty hard in some cases. That's typically not been where I've spent my operating career in those early stage ventures. I tend to get in companies that have more established markets, and they're really trying to focus on balancing that scorecard. So they want to have good revenue growth, 30-40%, but they also want to be, break even to generating, cash flow. So it really depends on the organization and, the market dynamics. So there's probably not one right answer there. But I understand the trade-offs and the challenges of being small and trying to put a dent, in the market. It can be very expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. There are so many variables. I've tried to, my personality is one to usually swing pretty hard in another direction. Like if I'm like, oh, this is a bad way, go as far away as I can from it. And, and the middle of the road approach, I think, is probably the most, like, that's why there's so many analogies and metaphors for like the straight and narrow, is because to be able to walk the tightrope with balance, considering all of the variables, it's a really difficult thing to do because it's more comfortable when you can easily define one way or the other.
Yeah, it does require, the one thing I've observed in my career is if you put on an investor hat a little bit more in your career choices and your business choices, time is the most important thing. It's actually not money, in my view. We all have limited amounts of time, and, we all have an end date. So, when you decide to focus on a project or go work for a company, you're really making probably one of the largest investment decisions that you'll make. I think people misunderstand as, buying a house is your biggest investment. I don't think so. It's really how you choose to spend your time. And so if you're gonna, swing for the fences and join an early stage technology firm, you almost have to put your investor hat on first. You have to really believe that thing has legs and the ability to, succeed and flourish. Because, I've known a lot of CFOs that do a career of early stage CFOing, and they never have had a success. They've never had a company go from A to Z and hit unicorn status, and they've made, good base salaries their whole careers, but, it's not always clear that just because it's early stage that it's going to, take off and be the unicorn.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit ago about like family, some of the influences there, things you figured out. What are some things that you have learned, and you can go vice versa with this, as like a family man, as a father, that have carried over into your professional life and how you approach leadership?
Yeah, the family impact, it's probably the biggest, I'd say learning that I had was, just being a little bit too focused on career for too long, even when I didn't have to be. So I had one of those jobs that, was kind of demanding and, 50% travel and traveling all over the world at the drop of a hat. Probably wasn't the best dad decision to be in India when my first child was born.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
Trying to fly back to catch the delivery, so, but, when you're kind of climbing the ladder and doing those things, you can get a little over focused on that. And, that's a real tough, pattern to drop. I think items in motion remain in motion. So once you're kind of in that motion, it's really hard to step back and realize, kind of how you're spending your time and is that the right balance? So I think, looking back, I wish I'd had a little bit more, ability to reflect on how I was spending my time, throughout the day. And probably the thing that, candidly and, a little painfully taught me that lesson, because it forced me to learn the lesson, was I was divorced 11 years ago, and 3 kids and a corporate job and 50-50 co-parenting agreement. So for the first time in my life, I had to make a decision. How am I really going to split my time? Am I going to continue to do the corporate thing and hire, a nanny and get help and, my week where I had the kids, or was I going to, kind of de-emphasize the corporate side of things? And that's ultimately the choice that I made, and had a good discussion with the CEO that I worked for at the time. It was a growing company, very demanding, and gave him the option to say, when I have my kids that week, I'm not going to travel. I'm going to be home at 4:30. I'm not taking phone calls. And if that's not the CFO you need or the organization needs, I totally understand. But it's the decision I'm going to make. And luckily, he had been divorced as well. He's like, nope, Dave, I totally get it. So you go do your thing. And it's harder to do than to say, actually. There was a lot of missed meetings and times when you're supposed to be in New York, and I had to send the controller instead of myself. But those are the trade-offs you make. But looking back at it, it was probably the biggest gift that I could have been given, because it forced me to be present for the first time.
To have that perspective, especially after a divorce that was only 11 years ago, I've met plenty of people who, everyone gets divorced for different reasons, who has been divorced. So I don't want to throw a blanket reason over this, but some of the people where it is kind of what you were sharing candidly, like a little bit more focused on work, and I'm sure there's other things as well, but a lot of times people don't learn lessons, or at least reflect on the decision to be divorced long enough to say, like, well, what part did I play in this equation? So like, that's obviously not an easy thing to come about and do. So aside from that just being the wake up call, were there any other things that served as a catalyst to like shift that perspective or to change the way that you looked at work and life and family?
Yeah, nobody, wants to go through divorce, but they happen frequently. And I guess going through that, I was the first person in my family to be divorced, probably for generations. It just wasn't a thing. So, it's something you work through. And I'd say, that the lens I took through that whole process, which is very difficult. It rips apart, and impacts every aspect of your life, from, how you parent your kids to, finances, everything. And so, I think the advice that I had going through that, talking to my peer group, that resonated with me, and I always try to live up to, was, when you're faced in life with a difficult situation, perceive yourself in 10 years looking back at how you behaved, and would you be proud of the way you behaved in general? And that's really the lens I tried to apply to that whole difficult chapter of my life, was let's always try to take the high road. Let's do the best you can in a difficult environment. And it wasn't perfect at all times. Certainly made some foot faults along the way, but by and large, I can look back now 11 years on this side of the equation. And generally, I'm really happy and really, proud of myself and how I dealt with a really traumatic situation in my life.
Yeah. Do you think if you fast forward to the year, whatever it is, 10 years from now, 2035, you're looking back at your 56-year-old self, that you will be proud then?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's one of the areas that, I've been spending more time on is giving back to people in my community, so being a mentor to younger people, particularly guys that I have known in my network, either through investing or, through my industry of, I can kind of see kids in their 30s, struggling with, some of the same challenges I struggled with. So I'm really making a focus over the next 10 years to build that network of, mentees that I can coach. I've got a few that I work with today, but it's probably not enough. And so I definitely want to, ramp up the time that I spend doing that type of thing. Even more than, the early stage tech investing and, looking for unicorns. That's kind of fun and exercises certain parts of your brain. But I don't think in 10 years, there's anything I can do in that space that I'll look back and say, wow, I really killed it on that front. But I do think, contributing to more communities and having impact on people is something that I want to focus more time on.
And it's so needed, especially amongst my age group. It's interesting. I was at a wedding this weekend and saw people who I hadn't seen in 10 years since college, in like early college, and that when I was in a very different place in life. Just, I don't even recognize myself. So, that goes without saying, for, I think a lot of people can go through that kind of an experience. But the reason I bring that up and say that that's needed, what you're doing, is because a lot of these people, specifically the guys that I met, you can always tell who moved forward just up here. I'm not even talking professionally, but just moved forward up here in the way that you talk, the things that interest you, the way that you process things, just the maturity of conversation. Because some people can be at the same place, or some people can be like obviously light years ahead. And I see such a struggle, specifically around my age group, with just like wanting to become a man, I guess, or like really take ownership. I think there's Jocko Willink has that book, Extreme Ownership. I think about that is just taking ownership for what's in front of me. It's not an easy thing to do, especially when it requires you to say like, oh, I messed up on this and I'm wrong and I need to change and I don't know how to change, accepting that and admitting that. So it's definitely a needed thing. And I'm really glad you're doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty informal at this stage. It's just I'm being more open to it. When I see people that I know that are struggling a little bit, I'm offering up. Let's get on a Zoom call every 2 weeks and let's just check in. And even with that, I try to focus on the important variables, not every detail. So yeah, I need to do more of that, and I think that'll be pretty critical when I look back. And it's great on the triathlon side.
Yes.
Getting into that community has really helped me with that. I can't tell you how many times. Well, first of all, I'm accused by all my friends of wearing Ironman swag way too much.
It's a cult. You have to do it.
It's a cult, and they draw the line at 3 Ironman items. So if I've got the hat, the shirt, and the backpack, that's typically where they have an issue. But
yeah.
I like to wear the Ironman shirts because I go to Lifetime Fitness almost every day, and I've run into tens of people that see the Ironman shirt. They see an older guy at the gym, putting in the effort, and maybe they're in their late 20s, 30s, and they come up to you and say, "Well, I'd like to do that someday. How did you get that? How did you get there?" And it's a good way to strike up a conversation. And I've had a number of folks that I've met doing that, and watched some of them go from no training or ability to completing their first half. And it's kind of fun to just check in on people and offer encouragement. It's actually the thing I really enjoy. I've been in that community now for about 5 years. Just how supportive it is. I mean, you rarely find anyone that's kind of negative in that environment and critical. They sometimes offer advice that you may or may not agree with, but it all usually comes from a good place based on their experience, and I find that to be very energizing. And I've actually tried to incorporate that into my, investing career, and the work that I'm doing, kind of giving back to my communities.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because, I come from a relatively religious background, just the way that I was raised and growing up in the South. And when I first got into triathlon, like really got into it, you're going to the races and meeting the same kind of people. And I was like, this is so much like the church or like a religion. So many people come here. This is the weekend. Your church is Sunday or Saturday, whenever the race day is. You're encouraging each other. All right, we'll see you at the next one. You stay in touch. And, it's like in so many ways, there's so many, and rightfully so. I mean, I think that's what church and religion really should be. It's about community. And so the sport, because you all have this common goal, you all have this community aspect. So it is a really neat thing to observe.
Yeah. Church needs a Strava app for sure.
Yeah.
Where it's easier to connect with people globally and, stay in touch with folks in that community and follow them. So yeah, that's been a good platform and a good vehicle. I've kind of learned a lot about, kind of working, with other people and probably one of the favorite things that I get to do at all those races, I've done a handful of them now, is I really like to go back, to the finish line right around cutoff time and watch the people that, persevere through the race and get their medal and at the end. And I just find that to be so inspiring and so uplifting. I'm an age grouper, right? I started this late in life. I'm not a professional triathlete, but, I work hard at it. I invest the time and I'm serious about it. But I'm also, I have my own individual goals, but, it's given me a lot just in terms of, that community, and just, I can't tell you how many inspiring stories that I've seen along the way. And I'm also really inspired by the, younger people who do this, that take the time away from their career and frankly families, to make the sacrifice and be out there. And it's really inspiring to see, kids on the side cheering their parents on, to accomplish these goals. And I think it's just a great thing to watch.
Yeah, it's definitely a lifestyle thing too. I really hope. So my wife, I've said it on the podcast a few times, but she's pregnant with our first. So she's going on week 16. Thank you.
That's awesome.
It is awesome and terrifying in so many ways. And I know that, so the due date is in December, and I'm taking an oath, like I'm probably not going to race next year. Just try to stay healthy and fit and really take on the fatherly duties and figure out how to balance life from that respect. But I really do look forward to hopefully, and I think I will do them again, but having kids on the sideline, because like growing up, I saw my dad do some hard stuff and my mom too, but being able to have a tangible example, I think for kids in the 5, 6, 7, 8 to see, oh, mom or dad, they committed to this thing, they trained it and they finished it. I think that alone is such an important lesson in a practical way to give to really any child or any person ever. And I hope that I can pass that down, because that's something like I feel like I lacked a little bit of seeing that modeled enough, because it was so hard for me to finish stuff for so many years. But then triathlon really taught a lot.
I think you've hit on something there, Seth. I mean, my experience parenting three kids, now three adult children, is they are so observant and smart, and they watch what you do. I firmly believe that. Like you can talk and parent to death, but if you don't exhibit the behaviors you're talking about, it's not going to hit. And so I think if you can actually, show them the behaviors, not just tell them the behaviors, that's huge impact. And the only other unsolicited advice I'll give you as a new dad, first time dad,
bring it on,
is, once the initial, kind of 6-7 weeks, have gone by, especially if you haven't spent a lot of time around kids, take the effort to take a week and be full-time, responsible for kiddo. And, cause you get a little nervous because it's really easy to have mom there and, mom does, all the things, but it's really important that you feel comfortable doing that as well. And so take a week and, do all the things, a full immersion therapy, I guess is what I'd recommend.
It's so funny you say that, because one thing that I have learned in doing podcasting is there is an uncomfortability in sitting in silence, or just being with that person, or not knowing what to do. I think that's probably the best example of that. So I had 2 younger sisters, and the one who's youngest below me is 12 years younger. And even when I remember being 12 and 13 years old and like trying to feed this thing, I was like, what do I do? Like, what do you actually do? This thing is helpless. It doesn't know how to say anything. You don't know what to give it. And then it cries and it just stresses me out. So I think that's, I'll try to do that, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's been, I wish I'd done more of that early days. But I think generally, this is a stereotype. I think generally, dads are a little weaker, when the kids are older, and we kind of come in a little stronger as the kids, develop and get bigger. We seem to be a little bit more comfortable, but, you won't break them. They'll be fine. You'll be able to, do the things.
Yeah.
And then, the other thing, I feel for parents now. I was lucky, I didn't have smartphones and cell phones and distractions when my kids were small. So when I was there, I was at the park with the kids and swinging them. And I walk around today and I see dads with their kids, and I saw one yesterday, pushing the baby on a swing with one hand and reading his iPhone in the other.
Yeah.
And, I could just tell he wasn't present, and he was going through the motions, and it caught me yesterday just thinking, like, you're going to regret that. You should have left the phone at home and focus 100% on that kid at the park, with the swing. You can check your apps later.
Yeah. Yeah, that's deep. And, going back to what you were saying a second ago, kids watch what you do. They care less about what you say. Not to say that some things you say or things that people say to us don't, make an impact. But why do you think it is that habits and character seem to be so much more encoded based on the actions of those around us rather than the words spoken to us?
I just think sometimes words are easy, and actions can be, harder. And so I think kids are smart, and, they're good detectors of hypocrisy. If you do the easy thing and you say those things, but you don't live your life that way, I think they notice it. And, I've had some regrets on that front, as a dad, corporate America, probably spent too much time, having you know, a drink or two and social functions. And, even when I was doing co-parenting, would go out with my buddies when I had the kids. And, it's those types of things are, they notice those things. And they notice that, you're prioritizing those activities and actions over, time with them and helping them with their homework. And it's just, I think we all do that. I've had CEOs that I've worked for that say one thing but do another. They have the right tone at the top, but then they charge personal stuff through their expense report. It's like it's hard for me to listen and respect your tone at the top when you're expensing your raincoat on the expense report.
Speak less, act more. I think that's
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
and I think having a group of friends, in all aspects of life. I think guys in particular, we're just not as good at networking and having mentors. And, so one of the things I've really been focusing on is develop a group of friends that are in their mid 60s to late 60s, kind of to your question of, will you be happy looking back, to my late 50s in kind of how I spent my time. And I think one of the best ways to think about that is, spend time talking to people late 60s. What do you regret? What are the things you did that really had impact? What would you have done differently? Being curious and asking those questions, I think really help. And so having a network of, friends that have kids that are toddlers, and asking those same questions about, when your kids are infants, what do you regret? What do you wish you had done more of, less of, all those things.
I need to do that. Yeah, it's a good question too, because me and my wife were, 8 years married and no kids yet. And a lot of our friends, even my younger sisters, have children and stuff. So luckily I get to ask all the questions. I'm already starting to ask some, like, how long did you let them sleep with you in your room before you start putting them in your room, or just all these things. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is going to be like starting a new business. There's so many things to figure out. Yeah,
it is. And it's all the practical realities. What's the balance of labor and, division of labor and, who's getting up at 2 a.m, and 4 a.m and 6 a.m. Is it always mom, or is it, because there's a lot of easy excuses to make that always be mom.
Yeah, no kidding. You have the milk factory, so
right,
we'll
exactly. Sorry, nothing I can do here.
I'll hit the start button. I'll push you out of bed, and you go do the rest. Yeah.
By the way, that's how I chose the division of labor. People always talk about, do you have problems sleeping? I'm like, no, it was fantastic.
Yeah, nice.
Never had a sleepless night.
Yeah. So is there any things that you have learned from the tenure, your senior people that you've been asking some of these questions that have been surprising or given you an area of focus?
Yeah, I think there has been, a lot of the folks that, I've talked to, they've had some learnings around, that age, kind of late 50s to 60s. They're just transitioning typically into retirement. So they're kind of going through things. And I'd say the biggest consistent item has always been, I should have been more focused on, community, developing my friendships, not being reliant on a spouse or a partner, for, 94% of my, activities. Social, because when you retire, it's a big change for everybody. And, it's a big adjustment to all of a sudden, be home all day and, be dependent on, a partner exclusively. So, I've had a lot of people that struggled with that transition in my network. They may have the means to buy, this is a really good example. They may have the means to buy a really nice house in Scottsdale for their retirement. And then they spend 2 years there and realize they're not like I don't know anybody, and half the people are gone all the time. And there's a lot of empty big houses around me, and there's no community. And I really feel like a prison in this big house with a pool that nobody comes over to. And so I've actually had friends that, bought the expensive house in Scottsdale and hated it and felt very isolated, and actually bought a small house in a 55 plus community because they wanted, an easy way to go play pickleball with people. So
Yeah.
I think it's, my oldest daughter, Hannah, always says, and she always reminds me, Dad, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think that's really good advice. So when you make those big decisions on, where you want to retire and how you want to live, put a lot of thought into your lifestyle and your community, and does it kind of serve your needs and not just your kind of material wants.
Man, there's so many questions that I could follow up that with, but the first one I guess I want to ask is like, do you have a best friend?
I do. I do have a best friend. I'm not going to name them because a couple of people will probably call me right away. But yeah, I've got you end up with friends from different chapters and different areas of your life,
Seasons,
but different seasons. But I've been pretty lucky. One of the for example, in my international career where I traveled internationally, I've been to 60 some countries at this point. But really got time on the ground in different areas, and I've developed a tight network of, there's 4 of us, one from Asia, one from Australia, one from Europe, and we talk and we've been friends for 20 years. We talk every quarter on Zoom, and once a year we do a guys trip to some cool place. We go see a Formula One race and, watch a soccer match, and it's really neat to have international friends and to maintain those relationships. And that's a good example of, my kids saw me maintaining those relationships, and, all my kids have an aspiration of, I want to go live overseas for a couple of years so I can develop those friendships too. And so, that's had good impact. I've got, friends that I've known, since freshman year of college that I've stayed in touch with. And it's actually kind of surprising to me because I underinvested in friendships for so many decades. Like if you were to map the time that I spent on friendships, it was probably less than 1% of my waking hours.
Wow.
So I'm actually pretty fortunate that I've been able to maintain these friendships for decades. It's one of those hindsight 2020. I wish I'd spent even 5% of my time focusing on those relationships and checking in on people. It's a little easier now with technology to do that. But I now have the time and the flexibility to, fly out to North Carolina and visit, your best friend from freshman year of college and spend some quality time together. So it's nice that, life kind of gives you, those chances and opportunities. But I wish I'd, spent more time, throughout my life, investing in that part of it. It would have been a lot more robust.
Yeah. I want to ask this, and then, well, I guess I'll ask this first. What do you think that you have that is a part of your character that made people interested in wanting to be probably more invested in you, especially during your younger years, than you were in them?
Yeah, I think humor, I'd say, especially with guys, just, being funny and, bringing energy to the room,
Joy.
both joy and just having a good time and not being so serious. I think that's been a part of it. I have friendships where, I've tried to, help people based on my experiences, come along a journey, friends that have, gone through divorces, and I've been through a divorce. So I, can help people through difficult chapters, if they're looking for, my input. And so, I think when it comes time, I think a good friend is not afraid to call people out on their BS and not be judgmental about it, but also say, hey, another path may be, optimal here. So, being able to have those tough conversations, I think, helps too. But, I'd say humor is probably the largest thing, and really everything in life, even corporate America. Boy, Seth, you can just tell negative energy, and people are sometimes just so pessimistic, and you'll be in a meeting and they walk in the room and you can just feel the energy leave the room. And, my advice is don't be that person. Like, try to, bring energy and enthusiasm to every meeting. If you're in a meeting, participate, put your phone away, put your computer away, be present, ask questions, be curious, all those things I think, have impact. It's, I've been in so many, even board meetings where, people just don't contribute, at the end, I'm always like, why are you here? Why are you even attending? Like you said, not one thing. You didn't read the materials before you, arrived to the meeting. You asked no questions. You gave no advice.
Yeah.
And then I processed your expense report. Like, why? And so, I think when you're going to commit to do something, you need to bring energy and positive energy to it. And I think that's friendships too. Be mindful of that. It's I think sometimes easy to be pessimistic and, kind of downward spiral in discussions. And, it's the first piece of advice I give anyone going through a divorce is like, stop talking to your friends about your divorce. Like that, I can't tell you unless it's a meeting to talk about that and get some input. Don't lead every discussion with, the latest updates on your divorce. People, it just saps the energy. So it's just things like that. Just, but try to be funny too. Like have a good time.
Yeah. There's healing in being able to make a joke at something, even if it's at one's own expense at times.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So we've talked profession, we've talked triathlon, we've talked family, leadership philosophy. Given all those things, like I've had an opportunity to get to know you now for exactly 1 hour. From your perspective, who is Dave?
Yeah, I know you like this question, and it's a good question. Listening to your shows, I've put some thought into it, and it's really, I think Dave is the curator of his own happy story. It's my job to curate a good life and a happy life, and I get to define that. And so I think that's who Dave is. He's a curator. And that's sometimes it's easy to fall into patterns and habits, and sometimes those are good habits and patterns, and sometimes they're not. So, I think just having the ability to kind of reflect on those and, make changes. There's a book I read recently that's, kind of the concept is basically healthier next year. Try to do one thing different this year that'll make you better. And it can be, giving up soda. It can be giving up, alcohol, which I did 7 years ago. Yeah, it's whatever that is in your life that you think will kind of point you in a better direction. You're the curator. You're responsible for your professional success, your career success, your saving success, your family success. It's up to you. So I think realizing that and being the curator of that is pretty critical. And so I'd say fundamentally behind that, like I want to invest a lot of time being a good dad, and that's changed. My kids are adults now. They don't need parental wisdom, and so for me to be relevant, it's actually how I got into triathlon. My son dared me to do it because I always talked about doing triathlon. So he signed up for one and signed me up as well. And it's things like that, was really outside my comfort zone. At the time I was 60 pounds heavier, and it was kind of a stretch to get, where I am. But the reason I did it, frankly, was I want to be friends with my adult kids. I want to have activities in common. Like I don't want to go to Florida and, be on an island by myself, and not be relevant to my kids. I want to be enthusiastic and involved in the stuff that they like to do.
Yeah.
And so that's been a real gift for me. And so, it's been probably what are the next things that I need to be doing, to make sure I'm, relevant to the kind of the next chapters.
Yeah. So to be able to have that, like you're saying, a friendship with your children once they grow up, I think is a super special thing. I know a lot of people who still haven't gotten to that place, and it's not even necessarily only because of like the parent side, but the child side, the ability to be able to start to see your parents as friends or as a human, or not just like this should be infallible character in your life. I remember when it happened for me, like almost like it was a night and day difference. I don't know. It was just a couple small things that happened where it kind of turned the lights, and I started to see my mother as like a little child. It was actually, I was having a shouting match with her, and it was the first time I had grown to a place where I think I could truly intimidate my mother. And when I saw her like kind of shift and turn into that like kind of scared younger woman, it actually scared me. It made me feel really bad. It actually almost brings me to tears thinking about it, because it was the first time I realized, like, oh my goodness, like she was literally raised by a woman and a man who was just trying to figure it out on their own, and she is just trying to figure this out on her own. And my mother's a super strong woman, and has brought our family through some incredibly hard times. But to be able to have that perspective of her has been one of the most enriching things for our relationships. My question for you is, do you remember when that started to happen to your children, and has it happened for all of them where they are able to kind of see you as more than just dad, like a friend?
Yeah, I thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's I'm dealing with kind of similar issues with my parents as well. They're 82, and having those same relationship transitions as well, as they've moved from being independent, fiercely independent 81-year-olds to 82. It's
Needing you.
needing a little bit more help and assistance, and so the new dynamic coming. Which is part of life. But yeah, I think with the kids, I've put a lot of time and focus into that. I have two kids that do triathlons, and so we have that community to talk about. We, have a common bond there, and I have a third child that was born and reared in Colorado, and is probably the most outdoorsy and tough child. She's a lot more courageous than me. She does, rock
You talking about
climbing.
Hannah, I'm assuming?
This is actually Ellie, my
Okay.
youngest.
Oh, wow.
She's 22, just graduated from school, but she does things that would scare the tar out of me. And I, just don't have the ability to do, hiking into a mountain, doing ice fishing and survival skills in the middle of winter. I have, not the interest or ability to do any of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, we're on all of them. They're different ages, and you kind of, work through, opportunities to be friends and a different relationship, kind of going forward and moving away from the parenting relationship. It's a journey, probably separately with each kid. Everyone's a little bit different, but yeah, I think we're well on our way. I'd say, we're probably, 70% there with the oldest, and, maybe 50% there with the youngest. And some of that, frankly, is, I need to make a decision. I've been spending time in, Las Vegas and Portland, and I like those environments, but, all my kids live in Denver. And so I think, being present and, geographically is important. So, that's something I'll need to think through, for the next, chapter, next 10 years, how important is that physical presence? And there's good ways to do it. I had one of the, kind of best experiences earlier this year. I just got a new gravel bike, and I've spent tens of thousands of miles on a road bike looking down at concrete. And I just had almost a religious experience on this little gravel bike, getting out into nature and doing a fun ride by myself. And I looked up, and there's hawks circling and hunting, and, it was like magical. And so for birthdays this year, I insisted that all my kids get gravel bikes. Like you just have to have a gravel bike because I want to ride with you. So everyone got a combined birthday, Christmas present of a gravel bike this year. And I expect that we'll go, out into nature and ride gravel bikes together.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Sorry.
You do things like that. And so, but to do that, I think, you need to be there. You need to be present.
Yeah.
And so that's a decision I'll have to make here pretty soon. Another one, just, your parents and your wife's parents are lucky in December, grandbaby coming. I don't want to be the birthday card grandparent, that mails it in. I want to be active. I want to be there. I see the grandparents on the bikes with the kids, strapped in the back, taking them to school. That's what I want to be. I want to be, part of my grandkids' lives, not the dial it in guy.
Yeah. Before I go on to the next because at the beginning of this, you started talking about your parents for a second. So I want to go to that in a second. So I'm saying this is almost like a little bookmark moment. But, you're talking about the gravel bike religious experience of getting out. I think it's so cool and interesting how you did have that. First of all, I think everyone should have the gift of experiencing that, because like when you're in a city or you're like you're saying, we work in all these straight line grids, not everywhere, but it's a lot of concrete, a lot of artificial light. But when you get out in nature and you see, like you're saying, the hawks overhead, like everything is curved, everything is just more fluid. It works together. It gives you a sense, especially when you see some of the just huge pieces of nature, from the prominence of the mountains to, I don't know if you've ever seen like a moose or a grizzly bear or whatever, like you just realize I am a very fragile creature and my life could be snuffed out in a moment. It's a beautiful humbling that you get to experience those things. I wish everyone had that experience.
Including triathletes. I always tell people that are kind of age groupers that are new to it, it's their first race. My advice I always give people is don't forget to look up and smile, like enjoy. I did Alaska full Ironman in 2022 and it was my first one and I was nervous. So, I don't think I looked up once. I was staring down at my computer, trying to make sure it was holding. Yeah, keep it at 18.5, you got to keep the watts up to 160, like you're in Juneau, Alaska. It could have been okay to look up and, enjoy the rushing streams and the nature. Who cares if you're holding, 200 watts? So, I think that's a big part of it. But yeah, I would say, I don't know, something about endurance sports. I've had just moments of clarity, doing, I don't know if it's fatigue or whatever, but I know I've had moments, Seth, when I'm out on the bike and I look up and I see the Red Rock Canyon of Summerlin where I live, and I'm, bombing down a hill. I'm just so happy and fortunate. I feel very fortunate I get to live that way and experience those things. And there's been a couple of rides and occasions where I know on my deathbed, I'll remember and be thankful for the fact that I got to do that ride and have that experience. And so, yeah, I want to make sure that my, kids get that too. And, hopefully I'll be there on some of those rides with them.
Yeah. Some of my greatest life lessons in the past 5-6 years have come from triathlon, from going out on my very first group ride, feeling the night before like it was going to be like it was a race day, because I knew these people were so much better than me. You're so focused on the pain in those moments and can I make it? And it's so inward focused, and your ability to see outward is like just a few feet. You're only looking at your own wheel and, like you said, the numbers. But then you go on the same level of an effort ride 2 or 3 years later, and the perceived exertion is different, but the same output is there. So it's just a testament to put your body under stress, the ability to adapt, and then your perspective widens, like you're saying, so much greater. Like looking up during an Ironman and taking in the stuff of Juneau or the Red Rock Canyons. Yeah, there's so many parallels between that and life and business, and honestly even like religion. Like you can draw these corollaries and say like, wow, like there's so many lessons you can learn from not doing the actual thing and doing another thing that's related to it.
Yeah, you're right. And we've all had those experiences, and the goal is to try to get more of them. Even running is probably my least favorite of the three activities, but I was in my hometown of Omaha last year. And I just, went on a fun run, and I was running through my old neighborhood, and it was just a beautiful day. And it occurred to me, I was 56 years old at the time, and I laced up my shoes and ran 10 miles without effort, just enjoyed the day. And, I'm like, I never would have been able to do that, even in my 30s. I would have struggled to run a mile. So yeah, it enables you to do things, and just, I have such appreciation for that. But your group ride, I don't do many group rides on bikes because I share that exact fear of just, finding the wrong group and just getting,
dude, it's the best.
Just getting humiliated, getting dropped. But the good news is my son is 25, and he and I first started this together, and, he's 6'3", 155 pounds. He's kind of a machine. So I'm used to being dropped on the bike, but his name is Evan. He's a little bit more cruel, than that. Like he does things which I'm used to now. Let's go for, a quick 40-mile ride. So in my mind, I'm prepared for 40-mile ride, but we're 40 miles out. I'm like, hey, I didn't know this was an 80-mile day.
Oh
You
my
start to
goodness.
get hangry and cranky, and he just thinks
Yeah.
it's hilarious. He thinks it's hilarious
Oh, putting dad through the paces. Yeah.
when I get bonked,
Yeah.
and I start screaming at him. And we've done that on the gravel bike too,
Yeah.
like up in Boulder. Like it's so beautiful up there. But yeah, there's some big hills. Like
Mm.
there's some steep stuff out there.
Yeah. Mm. Well, the last thing that I really kind of want to talk about, if you still have the time,
For sure.
is like, because you touched on a little bit when I was talking about, the perspective shift from your kids to you, but you were talking about the season of life changes that you're going about with your parents. And I'm particularly fascinated with that stage of life, because probably the generation ahead of me, I'm observing them from a distance of going through that, and everyone has different relationships. Of levels of just like intimacy, I guess you could say, like with their parents. And it definitely affects like the ability that I think a child to a parent, when the tables shift, when you're able to go and start taking care of them, the depth of that intimacy that you've had in the past is directly correlated with how much empathy I think you can have, or love and care that you will have for taking care of, even patience. So like for you, like what has your experience been? It sounded like it was a very real thing you're going through. I just want to hear your experience a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, Seth. It's funny. I've spent the last 10 years, really focused on my kids and being getting better relationships built with my own children, over the last 10, 11 years. And early days of that, it was, being full on co-parent and actually sitting down and helping them with their homework, um, and then merging into, just being relevant as they've gone into adulthood. And I've frankly underinvested in my relationship with my parents. We had a good upbringing, but they're a different generation, and they're a little more reserved. They don't open up their feelings. They don't share. They don't express themselves openly typically. And so they're fiercely independent. They don't think they need help. They don't want help. There's that, powdered butt syndrome. They don't want advice from someone that you change their diaper, and
Mm-hmm.
they're pretty strong and convicted on that. So it'll be an interesting chapter, because, life at some point, they're going to need more assistance and help. And, my, I guess, fear at this stage right now is I haven't invested the time, to be the person to step up and offer that help. So that's kind of on me.
Yeah.
And so I need to do more of that over the next, couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's a little daunting, and can be a little frustrating, because, they see the world a little bit differently than I do, in almost all areas.
A lot
And so
differently.
I've a lot differently, just
Yeah.
on everything. And, the good news is, I think lately, over the last year, we've gotten to a point where, we're not going to convince each other of our views. So let's just coexist with our, dramatically different, viewpoints on life, and try to, work together on
Mm-hmm.
things. But, it is a little intimidating. Next 4, 5, 6 years is you know, I think going to be a bit of a challenge. I think a lot of people go through this. The foundation isn't as strong as it could or should be, and yet you've got to build a building on top of it,
Mm.
and make some big changes.
Yeah.
So, I'm a little nervous about that.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine. I know I will be. Like, it's me and my mom for so many years. We butted heads so heavily, and like, we went to the place of, well, now she really respects me, and I can see that and feel it. So it's a beautiful thing. But I'm thinking back when the tables turn, knowing how fiercely, kind of you're talking about with independence, my mother is, for her, one of her famous lines was always like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'll get through it, or I can do anything, or whatever." Just like these very bite down on the towel or block of wood and just grit your teeth through it. And like, there's a lot of lesson to be learned in that, but the ability to accept help from another is like very difficult. And then me, I'm also so strong headed, and I know when the tables turn, it's going to be World War III, trying to get things, settled in, like, Mom, you can't drive anymore. Here's why. And, Mom, so I can only imagine what you're going through, I guess is what I'm saying. I would be nervous too.
Yeah, I feel sorry for my kids. I wouldn't want to deal with me when
Yeah.
I'm 82. It's going to be it's going to be a real handful for someone, and I just hope one of them probably would forget to feed me. So I've got a view of which one I want to be offering care. But
Yeah.
it is tough because it's a balancing act. The driving is a good example. But also just they retired in New Jersey and, they had community there, but frankly, a lot of their community has passed away. And so they are now isolated in that community, and I see it. But they don't, because it's happened gradually to them. And so they live in a 2-story house that they've owned forever. And I would be terrified coming down the stairs in that place. And, so I have to, work with them and start to slowly give them, over the age of 75,
statistics show
if you fall and break a hip, you're going to be dead in a year. Are these really the stairs you want to be navigating for the next 5 years? But their entire life is in that house. And it's a real hard challenge and discussion to have. And it's one, that, I grew up pretty close to my siblings, but we've grown apart. I have a sister that lives in Georgia. She's been there forever. My brother lives in Arizona. And, with that geography distance, the relationships aren't as close and bonded as you'd expect. So, it would be nice to have a united front with the three of us, kind of having the same view and opinion on how to help mom and dad through this chapter. But we can't even talk about these things and agree upon the things. So, it's a lot of work to be done to figure out, the best path forward here.
Yeah. We should all do a podcast together.
Exactly. We could get Barb and Bob on. I'm sure they would, they'd love to give the airing of the grievances of all the things I've done.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh man. I wanted to ask this too, because you were mentioned earlier on the gravel bike, you said it was almost like a religious experience. Are you a religious person?
I grew up in a Jesuit, kind of environment, Catholic, Omaha, Nebraska, a very Catholic, area. And so I probably started off that way, went to a Jesuit college, so I had that. And candidly, my kids' early days, my ex-wife and I, we joined the Presbyterian church. So, we were married in a Presbyterian church, and, maybe that's a derivative away from the Catholic church. But, through reflection over the last, I would say 20 years, I've kind of moved more towards not being, a person of faith, frankly, just reading. I've read a lot on the topic, and I see examples of as much harm being done by faith as help sometimes, and I have struggled with that. Just the overall concept. There's a guy that I like to read. He's passed recently, but he's probably one of my favorite authors and speakers. Is Christopher Hitchens, who spent a lot of time. He wrote a book, God Is Not Great, which is really just a critical view of what kind of a blind faith can do, unchecked, and kind of empowering people to do things to other people that, frankly, I personally just struggle with. I have a lot of friends that, find a lot of comfort in their faith, and I think that's fantastic. I'm the first person to, that's awesome. Great. I'm glad you get, joy and comfort, from that. But I do have a boundary. Don't try to convert me. It's just a non-starter. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to be, texted about it. I don't want to be, asked any of those questions. And frankly, I don't want to have the discussion, with them. Like, I'm not going to change their mind, and they're not going to change my mind. So I would say I've kind of moved more into the, it's probably a better term, not atheist, but maybe a little bit more anti-theist. Like, critical and doubtful of some of the organized religions and the impact that they have in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the greatest atrocities, I've said it a few times on this podcast, people are probably sick of me saying it, but some of the greatest atrocities were committed under the banner and guise of religion. So I can totally empathize and hear what you're saying.
Yeah. But I'm not out preaching my views either on religion.
Sure.
It's just, you asked, so I thought I'd share.
No, I love it.
And there is one thing that Christopher Hitchens wrote in his book, which I recommend people, of all, whether you believe or don't believe, it is one thing that I've always thought about, like the concept of having, kind of a dictator in the sky, forever, ruling over us. Some people take comfort in that. I happen to not take comfort in that. That sounds like something horrible to me. That sounds very Orwellian to me.
Yeah.
To have a kind of an overlord and that's has kept notes on how you've behaved your entire life and not gonna let you forget it. That doesn't sound like a good eternity to me.
Yeah, no kidding. So I'm curious to ask this kind of final question, maybe before a little piece of advice for the listeners. Like life after death, do you think that there is one? Does anything exist? What's kind of the best case scenario in your mind? Do you ever think about that?
I do think about that. It's funny as you get older. I had a friend from college, recently unexpectedly die of a stroke at age 57. And so, mortality starts to smack you in the face. And, I've had family members, when you get into your 50s, you're going to have suffered loss. And unfortunately, it's just a cycle of it. So you do spend a lot of time reflecting. I do think frequently about, boy, I wish I could ask them, like, what what's that doing? Like? Yeah. What are you doing? What's going on right now? And, but just nobody knows. You just don't know. Yeah. But I do think about that sometimes. But my suspicion is it just stops, and we're organic matter, and we probably just return to being organic matter, just like everything else on the planet.
Yeah. Good answer. So for the last question, if somebody was looking for a piece of advice on how to build a life that they would be happy with when they get to the age of 56, what is some advice that you would give to them?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest piece of advice is, always, don't let life just kind of accidentally happen to you. Like have a plan for your life, like spend some time, put your phone away, sit down with a piece of paper, map out for your life what you look like in 5 years and 10 years. How do you want to, see yourself develop, and write those goals down. I think I had a boss once that said, half of success in life is having a plan. The other half is writing it down somewhere. So, spending time thinking about that and actually writing it down and then working the plan backwards. Like, okay, this is where I want to be in 10 years. What are the steps that I actually need to do to accomplish that? It's the same thing I do with early stage, board seats that I'm on. Like, what does success look like? Do we all agree in 5 years? Okay, let's work that backwards. And everything we do, should be focused on, that goal. It's okay to change the goal along the way, but if it's written down, that we're deviating from what we set out to do. And then I'd say the other thing is, and I've struggled with this a little bit, but don't be afraid to say yes to things, new things, sign up for things. Like I've known so many people, I talk about, triathlons and Ironman. They're like, oh yeah, I love running and biking, but I could never do the swim. I'm like, well then do a relay, sign up with a friend and someone else does the swim, but sign up, like put it on the calendar, pay the fee. It's coming up in 6 months, and then work the steps backwards to, okay, I've got this on the calendar. It's a goal. Yeah. I'm going to execute towards it. I think that has benefited me certainly in my career, and some of the companies that we've built and scaled and sold. That's the playbook we've used in career. And I do think it's funny sometimes that there's a real overlap between your career, your business success, triathlon training. It's all about having, goals and then breaking those into pieces and being consistent in the execution of those things. And it's just easy. I don't know. So many people are and I'm guilty of this sometimes too, just we procrastinate, we put things off. But if you've got that race, Sacramento's October 19th, I don't care if I've done 4 of them, I have a work plan that I have to do to have myself be ready for that race.
Are you doing the Ironman California?
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Fantastic.
October
I'll be doing it
19th.
with you.
Yeah, fantastic. So you should come back after dinner and a movie to watch me finish.
I think I will. I'll put it down.
Yeah, like you'll get your finish, and then you can have a nice dinner with your family, and then saunter back 3 hours later, watch me finish. Yeah, no, but I think that's probably my biggest piece of advice is writing those goals down. I've never been big into journaling and happiness journals and all those things, but I do resonate. I understand why it makes sense, and something about the physical act of writing something down, I think is pretty important. And then, especially for men, I think women are kind of naturally good at, developing communities and friendships and mentorships. But men struggle, I think, sometimes with that. So that'd probably be my other piece of advice is, proactively seek people that, kind of further your goals and objectives. And I firmly believe you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I mean, I just think that's mathematically accurate. So if you're not an Ironman and you want to be an Ironman, find 2 or 3 people who have done Ironmans that are training and have lunch with them, have coffee, just start associating with people that, do those activities, do those things. And I think that's where you'll get your momentum.
Beautifully said. Well, I always selfishly enjoy these interviews, especially with people who have a lot more life experience than me, because there's a lot that I get to take from them. So I know that the listeners will also feel the same. And I appreciate you letting me ask so many questions about the different parts and seasons of your life. It was a good opportunity and I've been enriched from it. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Happy to do it, Seth. Good to get to know you. And I enjoy your podcast very much. I think you ask great questions. And I spent a lot of time, running. It's one of the changes I've made to better myself. Stop listening to music on runs and start listening to good content like yours.
Thank you.
Yeah, you spend so much time running, you might as well try to get a little smarter. So I enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Thank you so much again for being on.
Happy to do it. Thanks.
Thank you so much to Dave for coming on the pod today. Really appreciate him sharing from his heart, vulnerably, and a number of different areas that I didn't think we would touch on, especially the season about his parents getting a little bit older. I know that one day I'll be there and it'll be quicker arriving than I realized. So really appreciate him taking the opportunity to share some of his experience. We're all going through life at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So try to slow down, smell the roses a little bit, look up and enjoy the beauty of the overhead things like the sun, the moon, the stars, the hawks, the little things that we may not take time to enjoy. Thank you guys so much for being here, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.